Welcome to our panel discussion, From Black to Green, Why Climate Matters to Black Lives, part of our Just Talk, Talk Just series. Sponsored by Union Presbyterian Seminary's Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation and the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership. And Union Presbyterian Seminary's new Master of Arts in Public Theology degree program. Are you called to be a Christian leader in the public square? Know someone considering theological education? Contact our admissions directors at admissions@upsem.edu. Our panelists today are Veronica Carter, council member for the town of Leland, North Carolina, and member of the North Carolina Coastal Federation Board of Directors, Duke Superfund Advisory Board, and North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality Secretary's Environmental Justice and Equity Boards. Dr. Faith Harris, Assistant Professor of Theology and Director of the Indasumwan Center for Faith, Leadership, and Public Life at Virginia Union University. And Candace Laughinghouse, a PhD student at Chicago Theological Seminary. Our host and moderator is Dr. Rodney Sadler, Assistant Professor of Bible and Director of the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation at Union Presbyterian Seminary. Dr. Sadler, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's always wonderful to have your voice as you introduce me. It's a blessing and an honor to be with you all today as we engage in yet another of the Just Talk, Talk Just series. Those of you who've been with us realize that the Just Talk, Talk Just series is a response that we had as a seminary to the aftermath of the George Floyd killing. We need to talk about issues of race. We need to talk about the way that race has impacted all of the systems in our community, all of the systems in our society. And over the course of this last year, we've been engaging in wonderful conversations, talking about everything from police misconduct to prison reform, to the nature of the way that we deal with food in Black and Brown communities that are often food deserts. Today, we're going to talk about a different issue. We're going to talk about environmental and climate justice. Why is this a heart matter for Black and Brown people? Why is this something of concern for us all? As we engage in today's conversation, I'm pleased to have with me three very brilliant African-American women who have really set the bar high for what we need to do as we look at these issues. I'm glad to welcome today Veronica Carter, Major Veronica Carter, if I may, Dr. Faith Harris, and soon to be Dr. Candace Laughinghouse, all of whom are living in this space and are showing why this is an issue that is relevant to all people, but particularly Black women. You all, in various ways, have taken on a womanist lens to the work that you do. And we talked a little bit about this in the conversation with Candace and Veronica about 2 months ago. Today, I want to delve down deeply on a few other issues. I want to start off with a very simple question, which is, as we look at this issue, we are in the middle of the George Floyd uprisings and the aftermath thereof. We see the suffering of Black and Brown people across the country due to police misconduct, due to malfeasance in the criminal justice system. We've also seen the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, which has hit Black and Brown communities with a particularly hard fist, killing us at a much higher rate than other people, et cetera, et cetera. With these significant looming crises, why is it that we should be concerned with environmental and climate justice? Why is this an issue that should capture our attention as Black and Brown people, or as all Christian people dealing with justice today? Let me start with you, Major Carter.
Rodney, thank you. Veronica will do. Technically, it would be Major retired, but that's okay. All of us here are people of faith, women of faith, and you are a man of God and faith. And I think our faith tells us that we are not to walk past a mistake, that we are to be people of justice because we serve a just and righteous God. And so when we see something that is unjust, when we see something that's immoral, then it's up to those of us who've been blessed and have a voice to be the voice for the voiceless. And that's what's driven me to this. And that's why we continue to do this, because we continue to see climate and environmental injustice perpetrated on all of our brothers and sisters of color and of low socioeconomic status. And that's why I do this. And that's why it's important for all of us to continue to do this.
Well, thank you. Let me ask you the same question, Dr. Harris. Why is this an issue that we should be concerned with as Black and brown folk in the midst of all that's going on?
So thank you for having me, and thank you for that question. I think, the first thought that came to my mind with that question is the reality that, in fact, environment, and when we talk about environmental justice, is so broad that it, in fact, encompasses, and it's kind of the grounding for all of those issues. When we think about and if we understand the issues or the understanding of what it means to have an equitable, just society, then all of those issues kind of stem from the injustices that we experience. So, for instance, in Black and brown communities, oftentimes have been neglected or overburdened, by environmental injustices, industries that are toxic to the air or to water quality, or we have lead issues. There are a lot of intersectional systemic issues that actually build the atmosphere and the environment for what we saw with George Floyd. And then we can take this all the way back to the beginning of our nation, right? That these are systemic issues that started there, that have never been fully addressed, never been fully justified. And so I do this because I recognize, as a person of faith, that I have a role and a responsibility to be part of what's happening in the public square, to ensure that justice is preeminent for all people, and to actually help people understand how better to organize their lives, how better to address these the kinds of things that they daily experience. So I would argue that faith certainly is a place where we start, but it's not the place necessarily always where we end up. We end up in the public square, making the social and political changes that are necessary to give people an atmosphere or an environment that's healthy and experience high quality life.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Harris. Soon to be Professor Laughinghouse, let me ask you the same question. Why is this an issue, in light of all the issues that are going on, that should occupy our attention? Why shouldn't we just put this on the back burner and take care of the quote unquote important issues? We can't hear you. You're muted.
One, this is well, first, thank you for inviting me again. And I'm just elated to be here amidst Major Carter and Dr. Harris, being aware of your work as well. And I love it because we can all join in together. And it's wonderful to see other African-American women doing this work. Sometimes people will say, well, you do this work, and some people get a little insecure. I don't want anyone else doing this work because I want to shine. But I love this, being in the community of other powerful and intelligent Black women doing this. One of the things that Dr. Harris brought up is that how environmental justice is broad. Oftentimes, many people think of environmental justice as a white issue. And oftentimes it's because, we're trying to do things like breathe. I remember I gave a paper, I think it was the last AAR, and a woman said, I don't get it. My African-American students, I'm talking to them about the connections of earth care and where they live. They don't have the grocery stores. And I said, well, you have to excuse them for not having paper versus stainless steel straws be a priority when they can't breathe, period. So one of the things that I enjoy about the research, and you talk about environmental justice, it is broad. It's like my children do this thing where they take like a crayon and you spray or you hold up a blow dryer to it and it begins to melt. And it gets to melt all over the place. And, but the one thing is at the top, we know what is the source of that. And one of the things that I often do in my research is that when I'm talking about environmental justice issues is that I am looking at what Dr. Towns refers to as a cultural production of evil. And the source is pretty much, let's get down to it, it's colonialism, white male patriarchy, or Western, I had a friend call it Western economic imperialism. We know where all that comes from. And it's all over the globe. So from the Amazon to the second lung in the Congo, where Dr. Wangari Maathai spoke about, like, okay, you have all these people having jobs, but what she also saw was a diminishing of culture and identity. And so what I look at is that the fact that issues with relating to the uprising, to COVID, is that if we can not just talk about the environmental issues and importance, but connect it to our faiths. And I say faiths, all of our faiths, because Black people are not just Christian. We have to look at an interfaith thing. And even we have to be able to connect it to Black folks who are agnostic or not believing, or just we have to be able to look at that, because one of the things is that this care of the environment. I remember Dr. Peter Paris talked about in spiritualities of, African peoples, is that there's this interconnectedness of humanity, nature, and spirit within us. And it's not just Black folks, it's brown. Well, let's just make it clear. It's non-Western, non-European mindsets, that their connection to nature, humanity, animals. And that's one thing that I also bring, is I talk about the issues of animals, which can be kind of a really tense topic to talk about, when we have our culture as African Americans has been brought up, even though I don't know, I'm sure many of you saw the High on the Hog documentary series. That was amazing. But one of the things I remember was a young man speaking about, yes, once a year we did this thing with the hog, but that was because that was what was left for us. And that was in that state of enslavement. But that is not what culturally who we are and how we went about things and caring for even animals. So with the discussion of how important it is to talk about environmental issues, is because we are in search, even within the uprisings and even with COVID. I'm doing some research because there's a huge connection between many Black and brown folks dying from COVID because of the mucus on us, and the fact that we are not lactose persistent. Notice I didn't say lactose intolerant, but lactose persistent. Most of us are not. Now, many of us do have other nationalities in our bloodline, but as a people, we're just not that. And so when we already have all of the dairy industry pumped into our communities, we already have all of this stuff on our lungs and in our system, our mucus, we get COVID and it's just wiping us out. And so when we get to talk about the environmental issues, I like to really bring in, hey, this is an opportunity for us to also reclaim our identity. And that's, of course, where I bring in womanist principles as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I think I love the fact that you brought it back around to womanism as well. One thing I want to ask, though, and this is sort of a follow-up on something that Dr. Harris raised. She was talking about the fact that there are disparate impacts on Black and brown communities. I know that, Veronica, you deal a great deal with some of these impacts. I'd love to hear a little bit about, from each of you, we'll start with Veronica, about what are some of the things that you've seen that are disparately, significantly impacting Black and brown communities, both in terms of environmental justice and in terms of climate justice?
Well, I tell my white colleagues on the board, and I think some of them are very aware of it, that whenever we have environmental justice or climate justice that affects the overall community, the predominantly white community that surrounds us here in the Wilmington and southeastern North Carolina, that if you go and look in those ECJ communities, the brown communities, the Black communities, the poor socioeconomic communities, the impact is greater. Good example. I think most people have heard about Gen X and PFAS and PFOA and the forever chemicals right now. Well, that was basically came to a head a couple of years ago in the Cape Fear River here in Wilmington. And so we've been fighting that now for the last 2 years. It's gone up the river. The folks in Cumberland County and Bladen County are also impacted, as we know, and throughout the state, we're finding these chemicals. However, the reaction when it first hit the greater Wilmington area, because it was our main water supply for the greater Wilmington area, was that people went out and bought bottled water, or they got water delivered to them, or they got whole house reverse osmosis water purification units, and they made sure that they weren't going to drink that polluted water. Well, as Candace said, we don't have that opportunity in our areas. We don't have that ability because we're having enough trouble paying bills. We don't have the, we're just trying to make it happen in our communities. So we don't have the luxury of going out and buying water, because if we own a house, we're already paying for water that we can't drink or we shouldn't drink because it's polluted. So anytime there's an environmental issue that affects the overall community, you need to have an advocate who goes and checks on the ECJ community, because it's going to have a greater impact, because they're not going to go out and put a whole house water purification unit in their house because they can't afford it. They're not going to have that water to give to their child to take to school and say, don't drink the water out the water fountain if it gets hot. So that's the impact whenever there's an environmental or climate justice impact. Most of us in Southeastern North Carolina know that at one point, our folks couldn't buy property, the best property. Matter of fact, we had property stolen from us that still hasn't been given back. And so whatever we got stuck with, it was the property nobody else wanted because it flooded. So now, as we have sea level rising and climate change, when we have a hurricane, guess which communities are impacted the worst from flooding? Which ones the water recedes the slowest? It's those ECJ communities. And so that, for me, is the impact of ECJ with climate justice in particular, and the devastating impact for us.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Faith, would you like to jump in on this?
Yeah, so immediately I thought of a report we just finished covering I'm also on the Environmental Justice Council for the state of Virginia. And one of the reports we just finished reviewing really talked about all the cities across the country, capital cities that are, they're ranking in terms of asthma. And Richmond turns out to be number 3 out of all the cities highest with asthma, incidence of asthma. And we recognize the reasons for that, right? There are many reasons, but one of the main reasons is that right through the city runs the 95 corridor. That 95 corridor means that we are experiencing certainly higher volumes of traffic and individual vehicles on the road, just spewing out emissions right through the heart of the Black community. And so asthma rates in children and asthma rates in the Black community are higher than other regions and sectors in our city, as well as in the country. And so as you follow these major thoroughfares, major routes, highways and interstate highways all across the country, you'll find those same kind of results. And recognizing that how those routes began, those interstates were placed there, cited there, was on purpose, right? It was intentional. It was intentionally all across the country focused in lower wealth and Black and brown communities. And as Veronica also just mentioned, the idea, the recognition that most of the low-lying areas prone to flood are places where African Americans and brown and indigenous folk could purchase land, could set up their communities. And even when we had thriving communities, like for instance, the Jackson Ward community here in Richmond, that was destroyed by Interstate 95 coming through. And that was, and it was also a red line community. So because of that red line community, there was a recent, in 2018, a map of red line communities across the country, and Jackson Ward was one of those prominent cities are prominent. Richmond was one of the prominent cities, and Jackson more prominent community. And in that community, we now are seeing that now this is where we see the greatest heat island effect, right? Because it also the highway coming through, the concrete, the destroying of, the tree canopy, all of that exacerbates for the people who live in and surrounding those communities the issues related to environmental justice and climate justice. So they're already compromised. So that when something like COVID, a pandemic hits, the people who are already compromised will experience it more critically, and they'll have more critical outcomes, fatalities and outcomes. So if you already are number 3 in terms of in the country in terms of asthma rates, and COPD and other diseases that come from poor air quality, and you have a pandemic or a disease that comes into the community that actually targets the lungs, what the outcome cannot be anything other than oftentimes death. And so some of these decisions, the policies that have been historic, right, actually mean death for the people who who have been targeted. So we see these desperate impacts in Black and Brown communities because of historic decisions, because of systemic racism, because of the realities that we have yet to deal with as a nation. Not fully, right? We keep, adding, we keep kind of putting Band-Aids on the issue, rather than actually getting in and getting the poison out of the wound. And so those are just a few examples of why we see how and why we see these different impacts in Black and Brown communities.
Thank you for that. And I think that the two of you have given us a very thorough answer on that. I mean, Candace, did you want to weigh in at all on this question? Or?
Yes, I think one of the things that Dr. Harrison, Dr. Carter, they're saying is that the impact's greater, we're already compromised. And one of the things that I continue to come back to is that all of this has happened historically, and it's still going on because it keeps white supremacy in check. It keeps systems of oppression. It keeps us thinking we do not deserve health. We do not deserve certain things because we're already from birth. I just found out from my high school professor, we still talk, and I found out, I know there's 2 freeways, and I'm from Oakland. There's a 580 freeway and there's the 880. And he said, you notice on the 880, the Nimitz freeway, that's where the trucks ride. I said, yeah, that's a freeway you don't want to ride on because you're going to hit potholes. And he was telling me and showing me how the history where that's where Black and Brown folks live. That's where we could only live. And I'm like, wait a minute, all this time I was having a preference for not just 580, but I was actually giving in and supporting this white, supremacist view that this is deserving of this type of freeway, and this is deserving of this community. It doesn't matter. They'll have the trucks going through there. And speaking of asthma, that was years ago. But even today, when you're speaking of the issue with the children and asthma, that's here in North Carolina with animal agriculture, which animal agriculture is the largest greenhouse gas emitter, greater than transportation. Wow. And so you have North Carolina being either number 1 or number 2 for poultry and pig farms. And who is in those communities? But people that look like us. Now, here's the thing, though. You will have many whites living there and suffering from this, but they have no clue. They're like, they still think they're better than. So my thing is that when we really begin to push that this is a part of a system overall, and our faith is what can help us connecting our faith to caring for the environment in certain ways will also, I think, bring more of a will for people. Because sometimes people say, well, people can have the knowledge, They can even have the time, but it's the will that gets you to going. So when I understand that this is really a part of who I am, it's like when people find out, who their relatives are from back then, they kind of have a different purpose in life. And so I think that's the way that we can do that and get things going.
Well, thank you so much for that, Candace. And I want to, since I've started off with the other two people before, let me come back to you to start with this question now that you just basically raised. I've heard, we've said about in this old conversation that this is not just an issue for people of faith, that this is an issue that impacts all people, Christians, Muslims, Jews, Baha'is, atheists. Mm-hmm. But is there a faith basis for this kind of work? And what might that be? I'm going to start with you on this question. What might a biblical theological basis for this kind of focused work on climate and environmental justice, what might that be? And I'll follow on that one later on. Why should the Black church be involved because of that?
I think the Black church, the Black temples, the Black synagogue, all of us.
White church, white synagogue, yeah.
Yes, but I'm saying especially as African Americans, here we're talking here in the U.S., I think we need to be involved as a greater extent because like my neighbors across the street are Palestinian. Mm-hmm. They have within their sacred text, within the Quran, there's even text in there about referencing like a Garden of Eden. And for me and my work, that's what I go to, the fact that we're made in the image of God. And being in the image of God involves a stewardship and caring for the earth. That's our responsibility. Not this despotism and this, rule over things. And this is created for me. And there's some type of utility label given upon animals. They're here for us. No, it's a care. It's a caring for the earth, just as many, of course, Christians believe that God cares for us, therefore takes care of us. We should be caring for the earth, therefore taking care of the earth, taking care of what we do to the earth, and not thinking that it's something that's just a charity experience. It's really a part of our faith in honoring God when we do that. And the one thing I always come to is that we have to be interfaith with this, because even though my neighbors or anyone else has a different faith or does not subscribe to a faith, we're all still breathing the same toxic air. So we've got to come together and do that and emphasize that and move away from the narrative that this is not as important. We can be nuanced and work on everything, because one thing's for sure is that issues of race are involved, as we already know, in issues of environmental justice work.
Excellent. Thank you. Since there's a question about faith, why don't I ask Faith?
Oh, that was cute. Cute little pun. I was waiting for that. I agree a lot with what Candace raised. Mm-hmm. And I think, well, first of all, outside of the work that I do with the campus as a assistant professor of theology, I also am a co-director for a faith-based interfaith environmental justice organization. And we are interfaith on purpose, right? And one of the things that we recognize is that every faith has some principle or proverbs or sacred text related to care for the earth, or explanation, trying to understand how, what is the earth, what is life. So each theology, each doctrine for every tradition has something, some aspect where they call for and share a responsibility for caring for the earth. The other thing that I know I'm talking to a biblical scholar, so I'm going to weigh in here and get myself in trouble a little bit as a theologian, but one of the things that I recently, over the last 8 years, a book I read by Walter Brueggemann, I like to do my devotion. I have kind of do my devotion on Sabbath, the idea of Sabbath. And I think because as a child, I really hated the idea of Sabbath, because the way that it was taught to us, was like, turn off the lights, can't play, can't watch TV, can't do anything fun. But reading, so as an adult, I, have always kind of gravitated to, any kind of information on Sabbath, and recognizing that certainly wasn't really a great interpretation of what Sabbath was about. And so Walter Brueggemann's book, Sabbath as Resistance to the Culture of Now, really opened up a whole new world, a whole new way of thinking about what Sabbath really was about, that it in fact was an alternative economic system to that of what was happening in Egypt, right? And in many ways, he uses Egypt as a metaphor or as a way of, unpacking our realities today in our capitalistic system, where everything is based on, producing. You're either a producer or a consumer, and so there's this way in which it's counterintuitive or countercultural economically. If you want to follow a principle, the economics of the scriptures, right, or of God, if you will, then you are going to be focusing on the idea of rest, the idea of sharing, the idea of communion, the idea of interdependence, the ideas of interconnectedness. And then that's what Sabbath does for us, right? That the idea that when we recognize that to be human is to actually rest, right? To know, to rest and to be at peace with, and to be in a state of faith with the environment around you, right? So much so that you can take a day and not be trying to figure out how to amass wealth, right? You can take a day and rest. You can allow your animals, you can allow those who work for you, to give them rest, and that it flattens, it's democratizing, because it flattens and shows you the value of animal creation, the earth, the soil, but also of all the other living beings in the garden, and on the earth. And so the idea of Sabbath really helps to kind of it was like a key to a lock that I had not known was even locked, and so it just helps me to reorient what our purpose is, what's the value of our lives, what's the value of the life around us. And it just really makes us go back to a place of dependence and interdependence, rather than of, exploitation and, either being a producer or a consumer. And so that's one, I think that's one lens that I use. And also the truth of, or the reality, or I say the metaphor of the garden, as in many ways, that's really a metaphor for earth. So the Garden of Eden being earth, recognizing that the first mandate given was to care for the earth, right? To care for the garden, to till the soil, to take care, and that's never been rescinded. So if we simplify our lives to the point where we recognize, hey, the first mandate of everybody, whether you're a nuclear scientist or whatever, is to care for the earth. So you don't go into the lab and create poisons that will kill the earth or that will kill life. You take that same mandate into whatever whatever career vocation you choose. That ultimately, at the end of the day, your objective is to care for the earth and all the life that's on it. And I think that's where we start. That's where we begin having the conversation theologically, and for people of conscience, not that aren't necessarily religious, but that believe in, the idea of taking care of one another, the idea of community, and people who, just realize that we are actually all interconnected, and whatever happens, whatever I do to the other, eventually I'm doing to myself. And so that's where I start.
Thank you. Thank you for that. This Kingian notion about a network or a web of mutuality. I hear creeping out in that final comment there. I want to get Veronica in on this, but I think Candace had something she wanted to add before we hear from Veronica.
I was just, when Dr. Harris was speaking, it just reminded me that the reason why we need faith when we're talking about the environment is because we don't see results right away. And there's one thing about our faith is about when we're teaching is not just, somebody said the enemy of faith is not fear. The enemy of faith is really sight. Like if I don't see it, then I can't have faith about it, you know? And so I think that's the one big thing, because when you're speaking to people about the environment, they're like, oh, it's just too big out there. We're talking about the ozone layer, but you got to have faith in knowing that what I'm doing is building up and it's for a greater good. And I know it's it's God's will for me to do this. And that's why I really push that faith is important, because we're not going to see results tomorrow right away. Or it may be it may even be where I'm not going to see it in my lifetime, but that does not mean it's not something I work towards.
Amen. That sort of Abrahamic perspective. This is a promise that's given to you and your ancestors, and you may not see it, but you have to be faithful so that they might see it. We may not see it, but we have to be faithful so that our children, our grandchildren might see this kind of world. Veronica, you started off talking about faith, so let you take on this question as well.
And I'm here with biblical scholars, and I'm the layperson in the bunch. But I would tell you that my faith pulls me to this. When people ask me, why do I do this? Because I don't get paid for it. And I tell them, I go back to Micah, the prophet, who said, you know, and what does God require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. I also think back to the fact that we were through Adam, were put in charge of the earth, to take care of the earth, to sustain it, not to destroy it. And so those are the first two things when people say, why do you do this? The other thing is that, again, we serve a God of justice, and this is about justice for all. This is about ensuring both for our country and for our world that people are not deprived of their rights. And for that, I pulled up the quote from Isaiah, woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, who deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people, making widows their prey and robbing the fatherless. You know, how do you call yourself a Christian and not want to ensure that everyone has the same level of climate justice and environmental justice? To those who aren't of the Christian faith, that's fine, because as Faith said, just about every religion has a version of the golden rule in it, that you treat people the way that you want to be treated. Okay, so I shouldn't be polluting, I shouldn't be dumping on you or allowing anyone else to dump on you if I, in fact, believe in whatever faith, whether it's Buddhist or Islam or Hindu or whatever it is. I shouldn't allow anyone else to treat you in a way I wouldn't want to be treated. I think even atheists can get on board with that. So why would we allow our brothers and sisters to have to suffer from asthma or multiple types of cancers at very young ages because they are forced or have been dumped upon through unjust methods and immoral actions? And that's why I do it. And I think that's the true biblical or theological basis for the work that I do.
Thank you. And I've appreciated listening to you talk before, just about how this notion of faith, this Micaean passage, Isaiah passage, they really did seem to motivate you to get involved with this as an issue early on, even as you moved down to the downeastern parts of our state, North Carolina. And we're grateful for, again, all the work that you do constantly, all the work that each of you do to help to impact communities. As Faith was talking, she mentioned the name Walter Brueggemann. Of course, as a biblical scholar, that name resonates with me significantly. But one of the things that he talks about in that book on Sabbath is just about the nature of our capitalist culture that is constantly driving us to accrue more and more wealth. Acquisitive society. We're trying to acquire constantly. A question from the audience member, a QD, is: how do you see the connection of environmental and economic justice issues in consumerism, materialism-oriented capitalist system? So, what is the impact of, dare I say, this capitalist system on producing the injustices that we see in our climate and in our environment?
I'll take that one, Rodney. I mean, I'll use methyl bromide, which is something you're familiar with from the EJ and Equity Board.
Yes.
We had a group come in from Australia who wanted to do log fumigation using methyl bromide, which in every other country has been outlawed because it's incredibly dangerous. It basically cuts a hole in the ozone layer, not to mention it's lethal if inhaled in large quantities. And so they put this in an EJ community. The people knew something was up. They contacted myself and a few other of our local activists, and we started investigating. And because I do believe in faith, there are no coincidences. The first public hearing was the day after Rodney and I joined the DEQ Secretary's EJ and Equity Board, the very first day. And so all of these people who'd seen me sitting there with the then Secretary of DEQ, Michael Regan, now saw me sitting in the audience watching them and seeing how they reacted through some series of things that were that happened. The bottom line here was the reason they were using this deadly poison to fumigate their logs is because it was cheap, because they could make a bigger profit. There were other ways to do the fumigation or to ensure that the logs were free of bugs before they were put in shipping containers and still make a profit, because they were done in other parts of the country. They were done all over the EU, but this was the way that they could make the most money out of it. Okay, this is how they could squeeze out that extra. If they killed a few people along the way, oh well. But it ended up, because there was a fight and because we actually kind of won that battle, the company ended up getting a machine to just basically strip the wood off of the logs before they put them in containers. Now, that particular item cost them $250,000, but guess what? They still made money. Because, they didn't lose any money. Nobody lost their jobs. They just didn't make as much money. And I think that's the capitalist, materialistic oriented connection that's so blatant when you see this. It's not about, oh, we'll lose jobs or we'll do this or that. It's about, I can make even more money if I do it this cheap way. And these communities, who I like to call the communities of least resistance, the ones where they don't think we'll have the political will or knowledge or know-how or power to protest, that's the communities that we'll dump on.
Thank you so much. Faith, yes, please.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I mean, obviously, we could probably use that same lens, right? That same critical lens that Veronica just so beautifully outlined for us on so many of the other sectors. So just even thinking about the fossil fuel industry, right, that continues to build fossil fuel infrastructure when we know the climate crisis, they are aware of the climate crisis. And when we know that there are more equitable, cleaner, better ways to produce energy. But because they can make almost 100% profit by continuing to build out fossil fuel infrastructure, that is the way that they continue to go. We're still having to, engage in these resistance and these fights for these pipelines and compressor stations that are not necessary, right? We just had the Atlantic Coast pipeline canceled here in Virginia last summer, but we still have the other one, the Mountain Valley pipeline, that actually is still in process, and that all along the pipeline, they are failing to, they're failing to play by the rules, right? They're failing to protect the streams and waterways that they're crossing. And they're creating a great deal of damage, felling trees for hundreds and hundreds of miles. And just thinking about the reality that that same investment in that infrastructure could be easily, transferred to the renewables, but they will not make as much profit right away. And that is the reason for that. So that paradigm, that lens, we can use polystyrene, right? Why do we continue to make and use polystyrene foam when we know that it's poisonous in many ways and it's in everything, and we can't ever, it takes thousands of years possibly to biodegrade. So these are the decisions that are made that actually make meaningful, like incredible profit for the industries, but actually are destroying the lives of the humans and the animals and all that breathe and drink water along the way. And yet they won't make the decisions to do what is best and right for the environment and what is best and right for everyone involved, because they could make a little bit more profit. So we're going to squeeze the last bit of profit out of this, no matter who it destroys. And that, I think, that mentality is the problem. Transforming and people's unwillingness to be, in some ways, inconvenienced. I did a sermon a couple of years ago at a church, and it was on the environment. One of my statements had to do with, we really need to retool our entire economy to address climate change. And the reason we won't do it, the reason we can't do it, the reason why the conversation is constantly, how can we continue to live our lifestyle and still fight climate change? We can't. We have to actually be inconvenienced. We have to make new decisions. But one of the gentlemen in the audience for the Q&A said he had no intention of doing anything that would make him turn up his thermostat in the summer, and turn it down in the winter, because he did not feel that he needed to be inconvenienced for anyone who lived, and I'm quoting, who lived below the equator. So that's the kind of mentality that we have, that we're addressing. People who aren't willing to be inconvenienced for the better, for the common good.
And that's a frightening thing to think that we today still feel that way. And I mean, we could talk about that individual that you mentioned as a representative, but this sort of is the American way. We don't care what the impact is. We're making money from it, and that's the priority. We prioritize money, profits over people and planet, and we're paying a significant role for that. Candace?
I was going to mention, and I saw someone talk about the rise in sea level, so environmental and economic. I was doing some work on another kind of new climate gentrification. And basically you have areas like in Miami, for example, where you remember back in the day, everyone was buying up all the places there, and they realized, oh my God, the sea level is rising. Well, first of all, they really shouldn't have built Miami when they saw like it was really all marsh. And a lot of places in the US, I was in my daughter's class and they were studying biomes, and they started showing like, where are the marshes and where's the green? And it's like, why is New Orleans there? Why is Miami here? If they built these cities on top of things. And of course, over time, we have 100-year laws, like we're trying to look forward 100 years. I mean, come on, but what about when that comes to play? So you have like in areas where Miami, where they have like raised the city, like 13 feet up in certain areas. And so what happens? Okay, we don't want to be here anymore. We're tired of this. Let's go buy out where the Black and brown folks are and push them out. We're dealing with that in the Bay Area back home. People are tired of paying San Francisco. They're tired of, that. So they're coming over to the East Bay. Climate's a lot better too. Let's push the Black and brown folks out where there's no public transportation. Who's going to do the service jobs? Although that's not all we want to do. I had to tell a gentleman there at the YMCA. He told me that all the brown folks are still in our jobs. I said, no, we want your jobs too. We want to go on vacations. We want to send our children to private school. We want your jobs too. So don't get it twisted. We don't just want those jobs, and stop trying to pit us against each other as well. So that environmental connects with economic, that justice part is there with the issues of climate justice all around. And all of that is too, it's not a trickle down, but it's a connection with the animal agriculture, the things we're not doing for the environment, that of course is having all these ice caps and everything melting, sea levels rising, then the temperatures are hotter. We having all these hurricanes. I mean, it just makes sense, but people don't want to make the changes because, like Dr. Harris said, where someone says, and it's those people of entitlement. And that's what white supremacy does. It keeps people in mind that you're entitled for the better, and those people are not deserving of it. And if you grow up thinking that, I mean, they're not going to really make any changes until, of course, sometimes some people don't make changes until it affects them directly. So maybe some sort of tornado, or, like people won't wear masks until they know somebody died of COVID, or, things like that. And it's like, it shouldn't have to be that way. But unfortunately, there are some people that are just going to just wait.
Amen. Amen. I've got another question.
Rodney, if I could just follow up real quickly on that. Because I know that we have some people on the Outer Banks. When you're talking about building on marshland, that's basically the 300 miles of coastline that is North Carolina. We have houses on barrier islands. If you know anything about Roxford Johnson geology, the whole idea of a barrier island was to protect the mainland from sea level, from the sea, from the coast. And now we have these mega mansions on there, and they can't figure out how to protect them. Well, you don't protect them. That's what the island's there for. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And boy, that seems like it makes so much sense. But I love that last question, because I think it got us from not just talking about issues of materialism, capitalism, but white supremacy as well, and the role that it plays in this larger function. One of our colleagues, staff people, are theomusicologists for the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation. Reverend Leslie Oliver is a teacher, and she's very much concerned about passing this on. I was at a protest with her about 2 weeks ago, where she brought out a drum line, where they're teaching the next generation how to drum, and that served as a significant part of the event. But she asked this question: how can we engage the youth in our community to raise awareness regarding climate justice? How can we teach them practical ways to care for their world? The movement must include them from toddlers to teens and beyond.
Absolutely agree. And we've done things like included classes, age-appropriate classes on the environment. Earth Day, Earth Week is a wonderful time to start doing that in classrooms or at home or in the churches. I've been a member of churches that we had our young people just recently. We do our pull-up park and praise. We do our praising outside right now. But our young folks did an essay from different age groups on the environment and the earth, and why it's their responsibility as children of God to take care of it. Planted trees, planted saplings, and told them that they can now watch them grow, and they learn to water it and take care of it. And so when they start learning from that early age, this is important. This is something I'm supposed to protect. And when they then see someone doing something wrong, they also learn about the concepts of justice. That's part of that building block to get them when they become young teenagers or in their 20s or 30s, when they go, whoa, that's wrong. I know this is wrong, and I'm going to step up and speak out, because that's what I'm supposed to do. That's my faith. That's what I believe in, or that's just what I've been taught, and they go for it. But I absolutely agree. You can start by teaching them about the earth, and Earth Day is a good day to do that, Earth Week. Thank
you for that. Faith. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is one prong, and I think it's an important prong. But I do think that there is a way in which part of the what the pushback or the resistance to doing anything on behalf of mitigating climate change is that to try to help us try to get us to think of it only as an individual actions, right? That we as, consumers can, recycle and reuse, and we can do these individual things that will add up and make the difference. But in fact, we should be doing those things. But the other piece is we also know that this is not, that we need government and industry, government to force industry to do the right thing. And so from earliest ages of our youth, we need to be teaching them how to operate, organize, and be part of the dialogue and the conversation in the public square. They need to understand their role in making and building and creating and maintaining the democracy. And that speaks to all of the other intersectional issues. So it's not just on climate, but it's on protecting the vote, right? Protecting the representative government that we supposedly have. For them to be able to parse out and be able to think critically about when something is political and when it is not, when it's science, right? To help them do those things. So I think that's one of the things that we're constantly, debating and trying to make people aware that yes, you need to take those individual actions, but the reality is that we can't fix this problem by recycling. We're not going to recycle our way out of this problem. That we need our government, we need our representatives, we need our president, we need our senators, we need our Congress people to write the policies and then enforce them such that industry has to do the right thing, period. And so we need to encourage our youth to recognize their responsibility in organizing and holding them accountable. And so we start that early. We should start that very early with our young people, as well as teaching them about the science of climate change and teaching them about justice, teaching them about I heard a conversation yesterday, and I won't say the whole title, but it was about a book. It was the title of the book is How to Teach Your Children Not to Grow Up to Be A-holes. That's the title of the book. And the premise of the author's premise was that young people look at leaders and emulate them, right? And so when you have leaders who are making, a-hole decisions and a-hole statements in public, that the next generation is going to model themselves after that. So there's work we have to do to make sure that we are teaching our children what it means to be like some of us. I have a lot of gray hair. So one of the things my mother always taught, I used to hear her tell us, but I also used to hear her tell my oldest sister and her when she was raising her young children, that you don't raise your children. You don't raise your children for yourself. You raise them to live in community. You teach them how to live. If in case something happens to you, that somebody will want to care for you. So somebody will care about them. And this person said, that her parents got her. You don't raise your children. You're not the only one in the world. She constantly heard that mantra. You're not the only one in the world. So you have to learn how to mitigate your desires, wants, and needs in a way that make it possible for other people to have space in the world as well. And I think that's part of the equation as well. We can't forget those proverbs, that wisdom that came from our parents and our grandparents, that we live in a world with other people and other life, and that we need to, not take up so much room that others don't have place to actually to flourish and to thrive as well.
Amen. One of my good friends, Jason Williams, always says we need to teach people how to learn to live with enough. That's actually one of the points in the Brueggemann text is that we were to learn to live with enough. The whole point of manna and not having manna on Sabbath. You don't need to build up for extra. Just have enough, and you should be good. If we could teach children to learn to care for others and live for enough, I wonder what that would do. Candace, I'm sure that this is probably part of your dissertation as well. So,
it's part of my dissertation and a part of my life. I have 3 daughters. They're 11, 8, and 5. So, pray my strength, my sanity over here. But I think one of the ways I really like this question about engaging youth. I felt that I was doing all this work and this research on top of earth care. And I said, wait, I got to be able to connect this some way with my own children. They ask questions. So I started 2 gardens. And one of the things that I love about doing this work is that I love the fact that gardening is great to teach children about, hey, I can grow something for myself. I can also grow something we give to our neighbors. You can grow something for profit, but also gardening is the thing that is one of the most intergenerational experiences. And oftentimes people think that, okay, in order to get the youth involved, we just got to do the hip hoppity thing with the youth. Youth really want to talk with older people, as much old as possible, as long as they are also being treated as equal and they're not being, demeaned in any sort of way. And my garden mentor is a almost 90-year-old gentleman from Eden, North Carolina, and he comes over here. And I've learned so much that I've taught my children, because it's not just putting things in the ground. It's about patience. It's about knowing what you plant, you can expect that to come. So we talk about the seeds that you plant in your friendships at school, and that's what you can expect that. Certain plants, even though you put in 4 to 6 seeds, you really only are expecting so many to grow. And then even when some of them grow above ground, you really have to split them apart. So just because you see production, they really cannot grow together. You have to separate them. So all these things we talk about, and I think those are things that we can share with children to help them with their day-to-day, activities in life. And then they'll want to continue to come back. I was one of those, I love being around older people, and it's probably because older people I was around respected me and they valued me. So I think this is a way we can get youth to be a part. And also there's a lot of, and being in North Carolina, there are a lot of rural churches that have land. I mean, use that to bring children into the community. And dare I say it, not just children, it's some people in their 40s and 50s that know nothing about gardening. I had to think about my grandmother. And a lot of that, I don't look at it like, why didn't you know about doing this kind of gardening or anything? Because there's an era too where the focus was upward social mobility and moving away from any thought of putting your hands to the ground. But now we're realizing that, look, this is a part of our healing and reclaiming our identity. And we have to get that, although we have other folks who are commoditizing off those concepts. But that's something that we can help with our children now as they progress. My kids are in Montessori, and they teach children at 2 and 3 how to care for the plants, how to care digging in the ground just with dirt. And so those things can help children. We have more cases because of toxins and things with ADHD, asthma, and all. Get the children around that, the greenery, and that will help them as well.
Amen. And let me just say, I'm sorry to say that we are at the end of our time, because this is rich and there's so much more I want to ask you about. Who are your heroes? What would churches do to get started? What organizations are doing great work out there? There's so much more I want to ask you, but I just want to say thank you today. Major retired Veronica Carter. It's always great to be with you, my sister. Dr. Faith Harris. I've hung out with you from Clinton, Tennessee, all the way up to Richmond, back here to Charlotte again. It's wonderful to be with you again. Candace Laughinghouse, Reverend, soon to be Dr. Candace Laughinghouse. I can't wait to read the product of your dissertation as it comes out, as you are living in the space. Me too. I see you say that. Me too. It's wonderful to have you all with me, and we were blessed by this conversation. I want us all to know that this work continues, that there is more going on with this. And I want to let you know about an event that's coming up on October 10th through 13th, around the period of Indigenous Peoples Day. That Monday, we're going to start off with the Green the Church National Virtual Summit. Our brother in this work, Reverend Ambrose Carroll, is going to present Green Lessons from Black Wall Street, 1921 to 2021. Infrastructure, agriculture, and equity for the people had a mind to work, lifting up Nehemiah chapter 4, verses 6 and following. For more information on that, please contact www.greenthechurch.org. Again, www.greenthechurch.org. I want to say thank you all for joining us today for this conversation. Thank you all for weighing in, and we hope that these conversations will continue as we move into the fall. We'll continue to delve into issues that have impact on issues of justice, issues of womanism, issues that deal with Black lives and the fact that they really do matter. We want to emphasize that this is a significant concern of our faith, so continue to follow us for our Just Talk Just series. God bless you all, and have a great day. Mike, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Sadler, and thank you all for watching. Save the date for our next discussion, August 10th on reimagining social change. Watch your email for details. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day.